it's quite a hermetically sealed kind of individual job. You don't work as a team necessarily, although you do have clients, you might have an ad agency and stuff. Most of the work is done in a room in my house, with my wife sat behind me. And you don't really get to discuss your work. Your work only ever is completed. Generally, when you do a talk like this, you kind of show your greatest hits, but it's not really representative of the life of the illustrator. Most of it is process. Most of it is, 99% of it is developing ideas, refining ideas, abandoning things, chucking them out, getting it wrong. And you only ever get it right at the end of the project, sometimes later than the end of the project. And you deliver, and you don't really get to sort of consider it before you move on to the next one. So there's only times like this where you kind of come and talk to guys like you, where you kind of have a little bit of an epiphany about your own work, because you're looking at it for the first time with almost like fresh eyes, because it's just gone out the door and you're on the next project. So it's a little bit weird, and I had 3 issues. One last night, I was out with Andy, and he said that I should start with an introduction about myself, and I hadn't prepared one. I thought I'd just jump into the whole ideas concept. So I've kind of rustled together a little bit of a background of work that I've done in the past, but there's not much of an introduction. You're going to have to sort of look me up on the internet if you're remotely interested. But what I'm trying to do is go through... is it still working? What I'm trying to do is go through things that represent the whole concept of ideas. I also had an issue with that whole ideas thing, because I think it's more in the realm of graphic design than it is in illustration. But then again, as I was saying about epiphanies, I kind of, having looked at my work, I realised I'm not really an illustrator of late. It's more branding, it's more kind of graphic design than anything else. So it is relevant, so I can't really argue against it. So anyway, that's me, before I had a beard. And go. That's not me. This is just stuff that's kind of knocking around on the hard drive that I kind of tried to rustle together to show a representation of my work. There is a common thread in terms of sort of the style, but I do jump around quite a bit. I'm not really representative of your average illustrator who has a set style that clients come to for. I tend to kind of make a style bespoke for the job. And that, I think, comes from being an animator, where animation is the key thing as opposed to sort of having authorship of the style. So I'll work with other people. I'll work with Martin, who's going to talk after me. I'll work with Scott, who's another illustrator in Hastings. A guy called Gaz, Gary O'Neill, who lives in Hastings as well. So I kind of animate other people's work. I'm not interested in authorship of the work in the same way that a lot of illustrators are. I think the pressure on students sometimes is to figure out a style and sort of claim the work as their own, rather than thinking of the actual job. The job is to please the client and to do the actual job, or fulfill the idea. And sometimes you can get wrapped up in kind of what things look like and forget that side of things. It's cookies. So these are just like different styles for different jobs, jumping around with practical stuff, where I cut out paper and then drew on the top of it. Most of it's digital, but sometimes a little mix of media. That was for Wimbledon. So they're just kind of, there is a common thread in the style. They're kind of the geometric shapes. A lot of it's drawn in Illustrator and embellished in Photoshop. That's a kind of realistic stuff that I tend to do for sort of food packaging. This was, this was a compromise, because essentially I wasn't going to talk about, I do a lot of work for Marks and Spencer's of late, and Andy said, well, if you haven't got an introduction about yourself, at least you can show the Marks and Spencer, and I didn't have that either. So this is some of the stuff for Marks. Keep Andy happy. This was a project which was obviously celebrating the Jubilee at the time, so it was used on numerous things, biscuits and tea towels and candles and stuff that's actually quite valuable on eBay now, because it was obviously quite good. The style of the characters was quite digital and clean and drawn in Illustrator and then embellished with hand-drawn line art, and then the hand-drawn line art was then transferred to things like this, which were a kind of different tone, a bit more straight, but it kind of allowed for an aesthetic that was shared across the whole range. So you have this kind of digital artwork, which is the main body, and then I was kind of trying to loosen it up and make it a bit more human with the black lines. And it was also kind of trying to be contemporary, but also, given the fact it's a jubilee, it needs to reflect heritage and the monarchy and all that, so it needs to look retro and modern, a little bit light, humorous. This was a job for a medical company where they were developing antibodies for various diseases and whatnot, so there's an idea of a robot that then kind of got infected and went bad, so these things are being animated, but it's a bit more of a clean, kind of contemporary look. And that's just a hot dog. And this is for a Stephen King animation. So just to show that, you know, I do live action, I do collage stuff, numerous bits and bobs, and I was just trying to sort of sum that up. But that, anyway, that's my back history. So we go to the next PDF. So I work quite a lot with a company, ad agency called The Clearing, and they were rebranding Book Trust. This is an example of a disastrous project. Not in terms of the way that it actually worked, but the fact that at the finale, when we finished it all, the company folded and collapsed. But I'd got paid, so I couldn't give a shit. So and it's a nice project, and it led up to more, which I'll talk about in a sec. But this was the first response. They wanted to warm up the Book Trust. And that was their logo top right. They wanted to work with red, black and white as their new kind of colour scheme, which I didn't know at this point. This was just the first response. So they wanted to warm it up. The company, by and large, was providing books for education. Lots of kids' books, lots of stuff going out to kind of W.H. Smith and whatnot. So they wanted to make them reflect the majority of their content, which is kids' books. So I thought I'd have kids reading books, looking happy. Obviously their hair kind of reflects love and the Book Trust logo. But it's a little bit too clean, a bit graphic. So I was trying to dirty it up with a bit of texture, coming up with some ideas about using books, just putting the ideas there, about using books as different props. This was kind of taking it a bit further, because they were saying it was a little bit graphic and a bit tight. I tried some sort of paint to the approaches. These were all kind of done in the space of maybe 2 days. It was just like a first response, I could just do really quick, kind of shoot stuff out and just send it over and back and forth. And this fella was the one that they liked, which is probably the worst drawn, but the aesthetics of it are quite nice. And it was the first time I'd kind of thought about using the red, black and white, which they intended as the livery. So then that character got, yeah, so that was kind of fun. So then I did this character, and although we didn't use this kind of summed up the whole project really, in terms of having a little scrappy black, white and red character with a bit of life, a bit of vim. I didn't, obviously genuinely, it's hugely apparent, but I didn't spend very long drawing these, they were really quick. But it's a bit of a misdirection, because in order to draw like that, I don't do this naturally, so I probably had to draw about 50 little girls before I kind of got the one that I was pleased with. So although there's not much labour in the actual characters, to get there you have to draw hundreds. To add a bit of depth and modelling to them, we kind of started using this tone. It sort of stays with the black and white aesthetic, but it allows for a bit of kind of tonality and shadows and a bit of depth. So we developed these characters, these are the kind of heroes. That chap, especially. And then we started playing around with the book, the interaction with the book. So he's like a kind of Chad, or he's like riding it like a horse for some reason. And then riding again like a horse. He really likes his books. So just lots of different kind of variations on that could be used all throughout their catalogues and on websites and stuff like that. But as I say, this project folded. Unfortunately, the company died as it was completed and delivered. But they did manage to kind of do some sort of mock-ups of bags and stuff, which I'll show you in a second. So this was just coming up with ideas about how it's comforting at night, just ideas about books then. So once you've got the aesthetics sorted out, you need to start thinking about the content. And this was just covering various things like cookery books, horror books, books that kind of send you to sleep at night, or and lots of different variations. And this was the kind of application that would have happened had it been fulfilled. And this is just an example of kind of, we started to kind of play around, the characters took second place to the books after a little while. We started playing around with kind of sports books. We've got knitting down here. And the books started to become the heroes. There you can see the sails of a ship for kind of history and whatnot. And it was just, like I say, it was a nice job in that it was just really refreshing to kind of just tear through loads of ideas and just chuck them out. And some of them were really shit. Some of them that made it to the slideshow are really shit. But it gives a sense of kind of just quick, throwaway joy, really, I think, about publishing. So they were really happy with this project, despite the fact that it didn't kind of live properly. They were really happy with the kind of style of it. So if we can go to the next PDF. So we took the principle of this, which was like a restricted colour range for a job for Dogs Trust. Still the clearing. They wanted to rebrand Dogs Trust, which had this character as their established branding. And he's, spoilers, is it on like an auto thing? Because it keeps kind of pushing forward. Seriously. So that, can you just pause it for a sec? So yeah, so this is their branding. This is the cup, for fuck's sake. So this is their branding. It's the yellow, the black, the dog, and it kind of linked so strongly with the book project because it was 3 colours and they needed something which was going to warm up their identity. They basically rehouse dogs that are, you know, it's not like you go to a kind of a pedigree place and choose a schnauzer or choose a red setter or whatever it is. You go there, there's random dogs, they're generally kind of mixed breeds, you don't know what the hell you're going to get. Can you pause it? And so it needed to reflect that. So again, it needed the life, it needed a bit of fizz, it needed like it to be random, so we thought, well, we'll just basically take what we've developed for book people and apply it to this. So the first page I did, which is the next one, was just a scrappy load of dogs. And the idea was that you basically I just scribbled with different pen nibs in Photoshop. And tried to then make a dog out of them. Yeah, it might be better if you just, if I just kind of say next one or something. So basically, can we go back? So yeah, so the idea was that we just did loads of scribbles. This was the first response as well. This was done within about half an hour getting briefed, and it's just, you just smack a load of stuff on the screen, and then you kind of try and make sense of it. So it was like using the black to kind of just add little touches to make the dog. This was rejected because it was too kind of anthropomorphizing a dog, and we decided we weren't going to show any owners. The dogs were the hero. Go to the next one, please. So then we developed this, which was the hero dog. It uses the yellow, it uses the black, it uses the white, so it reflects the livery. And with jobs like this, it is illustration. But like I said, the epiphany I kind of had about my own work is that, like, I started out doing kind of kids' books and narrative things and illustrations for articles in magazines and whatnot. But more and more, I've been doing branding, and it's almost like, it kind of leans more towards graphic design in the fact that it's almost like the style of the characters is like selecting a font, and then you've got the parameters of working within a restricted colour palette, which is dictated by the brand. So there are parameters within it that reflect graphic design, but you're trying to add a bit of warmth, which I think comes from illustration. I think the idea of ideas in illustration is not a bad thing. So I don't think there's any situation where a good idea would be seen as anything other than that. But sometimes with illustration, it's more about the emotion, it's more about feeling and stuff. When you look at something that it makes you kind of reflect or feel a certain way. You can look at a painting of an old guy in a gallery, a portrait of somebody. You don't need to know the circumstances under which it was painted. You don't need to know who the person was to have sort of some emotional response. With this stuff, it's far more clinical, it's far more graphic. And so I've kind of realised I'm a bit more of a graphic designer than an illustrator at the moment. But, so yeah, anyway, this was the character that we came up with, this was the kind of hero, and again, because the nature of kind of selecting a dog from the Dogs Trust is random, we did a load of other dogs. This is in different situations, adding a bit of charm, a bit of life. And it's quite nice. I think the restrictions that you put on yourself in a job are as important as anything else. It's very, you kind of think as a student, and even as myself, you kind of think the dream job would be endless budget, endless schedule, and you can do what you want. And that is actually the worst thing you could possibly do, because you just get lost and you go up your own arse. What you need is for someone to say you've got 2 weeks, it needs to take 500 quid, and it needs to use 2 colours. And then you get creative. Adversity is what promotes creativity. So these restrictions that I kind of put on myself and put on by the client are actually really good, because you get creative within this little tiny bubble. That's that dog doing lots of bits and bobs. And then we came up with other dogs in the same vein. In terms of sort of restrictions, again, I didn't let myself draw fur. So all of these edges and lines are made by the brush. So I kind of customised a Photoshop brush to have a rough edge. Although it's not as spontaneous as the first rough, where we just did scribbles and then tried to make them dogs, these are kind of a bit more contrived, and then obviously I wanted to put it in that position and stuff. Tried to keep it loose, but like I say, not drawing details intentionally, but more they're created by the use of the brush. So there's lots of different characters, doing different daft things. I'm getting a bit of charm in there, so there's another fella. And they couldn't be breed specific because of the nature of the dogs being random, so they're just kind of made up weirdos. This is the sort of application of it. Okay. That's an animation. We just press the button on animation. No, sorry, that's just, I think, the actual thing in the PDF. Yeah. So on the back of that, we started to do little animations. These were little GIFs, little loops that then were used on social media. Again, just to add charm and just sort of, there were certain rules, like the dogs will have to have leads on, things like that. So we don't lose them. Can you go to those little animations? So those set quick times. So again, these are just little loops, very quick. They're animated on 2s, which means every other frame, which is about 12 frames a second, so there's not an awful lot of graph that goes into them. But they're just charming. They kind of look like a bit like rhubarb or old kind of animation from when I was a kid. Let's just give it a bit of personality to the branding. So I think that's for that project. So if we go on to the next PDF, please. So, another job was for a brand called Smarty, and they are a mobile company, and they wanted to brand themselves, and they wanted to reflect the kind of disparate nature of all of their clients. So they needed them to be, they wanted to have characters, they wanted to brand it as characters, they wanted to have vivid, contemporary colours. They wanted it to look contemporary and modern and clean, but outside of that, they didn't have an awful lot. So one of the first things we did was come up with this grey, because when you have colours against white, sometimes it's quite it's too vivid and too clean and too kind of clinical. So we came up with this kind of grey background, which everything could work off. You'd still have a bright aesthetic, but it kind of housed it somehow. It's quite, but these characters, they gave me a list of characters. One was a gym bunny, and this was a character, this is Stretch Armstrong, which I think is still going. It's a toy from when I was a kid. So I basically drew him with a massive knob, and the idea was that he would be the sort of, this is like trying to work out, this is the general aesthetic. Before you kind of jump into hundreds of characters, you kind of do, it's nice to do one quite often I'll actually adapt that one character to be numerous others, but this one is, it's kind of like you need almost like a kind of stamp at the beginning to be able to then keep referring back to as a kind of reference. So this was the first kind of style. It was very clean, very digital, just playing around with how we might animate, because if it's going to be an animation, it's going to be a commercial. Just playing around with different versions of him, different states of ripped. Kind of working, like, because he's in love with the gym, he's just working in little tiny little details, little ideas, like love hearts and stuff, which actually made it into the animation, which I'll show in a sec. And this was the character that we kind of came to again. He kind of avoids the kind of racial issues where it's like, if you make them kind of just daft colours, then nobody's offended, it kind of is really inclusive. And it avoids you having to kind of tick various boxes of what you need to include in an ad. So basically what we did is just made the colours abstract. And we had a little palette that we worked out, which was kind of vivid, but kind of pastel-y at the same time. This was again sort of evolving the character and how he'd interact with the background. So he stays the hero by making these things kind of knock back tonally. This was a dog lover, so various states of kind of gimp outfit dog shenanigans going on. And these are the dogs that he's going to walk. This is an emotional girl, oversharer, somebody that kind of talks too much and tells everybody what she's thinking. So this is just working out how she'd look when she animates, refining her a little bit more. This is a political protester, so I kind of made him quite angular, quite spiky, aggressive. And I read something years ago about the fact that like characters should always have, you should be able to read a character by their silhouette. And it certainly applies with animation, but you should be able to just black them out and still recognise the character. And if you do it with a lot of TV shows, you'll find that it's really apparent. That the silhouettes are different. It works with feature films as well. It's like, you know, one guy wears a hat, one guy's got a cane. It's just little things that define a character physically through their silhouette, so it should be easily readable. It also relates to kind of emojis, which kind of felt relevant given that it's a mobile phone company. This was a fair weather friend, so the idea being that she's fleeting and easily kind of, you know, so it's like a light, fluffy sort of flame that can blow out at any time. So the idea that you could bugger off at any point. Evolving that character just to see how he might move in extreme poses. This is the TV spoiler friend, so it kind of ruins TV shows by telling you what's going to happen. So just make it a screen. And that was the full set. So these are all the characters that appear in the ad. It was just kind of, it's really good kind of putting this stuff together like this, because it just, you can read the palette, you can see how things fit together, and you start to get a sense of the branding. So I think that's a quick time. So then I animated it. So then what they did is they did a song, and I'm going to play it for you, and the song is awful, and it really winds me up. But what I realised the other day is that they didn't put any sound effects on it. So with animation, it can feel quite light. Say you have somebody walking across the room, it can feel quite light, and it works better if you put footsteps on. Immediately gives it a sense of solidity and volume, and you feel like you know where they are. With this, they didn't put any of that on, so unfortunately it feels a little bit weird and a bit light with the music, but play it now, these sound as well. I mean, it's awful, but it's better than that. So the song was basically talking about the different characters. They each got a little verse, as you see, and they each get their little hero moment. And then parts of this ad were kind of ripped out and taken to social media and made into little loops. We've got animation students in the house. No. Shit. Bodes well for the industry.
I did invite them over.
They're not asked, are they? They're all working. takes so fucking long.
There might be some other bits after this.
Oh, maybe. Nice, I like that save. Go.
Doing all kinds of stuff. I'll never be their kidney donors, but some have annoying social media personas. You know the ones saying happy birthday to you, though you've not seen them in person since 2002. One day of the year they write in your feed, the other 364 nowhere to be seen. Then look, let's overshare a friend. Ultrasounds in public can't really defend. Babes, we've actually seen your womb on our mobile screens. By the way, here's Mrs. TV show spoiler friend, who's not so cryptic status gives away the end. Excessive use of emojis that cry make it obvious the hero died. No. Gym again, friend, all guns and protein. So many photos, you know his regime. Chuffed, he's reached his personal best. Watch out, or you burst out your tiny vest. Here comes angry political friend, wanting me to sign a petition again. What now? There's so many causes, I lose track. Love you despite the hashtag attack. Too many dog photo friend truly knows how to put her beagle in every post. Oh look, there he's doing a wee, you really put it out for all to see. Despite your little quirks, I'm not gonna lie.
So anyway, that goes on and on. But the nice thing about that, the lucky thing about for this generation really, is that you can kind of do all this stuff from home and on your own. So I basically did everything on that job, and did it from my living room, from a room at the back of my living room. And it's lovely, but like I say, the nerves that you get when you come to talk about your job generally come about because of that scenario, because of the fact that you're in this hermetically sealed kind of sandwich box doing your work on your own. So it's quite nice to collaborate, and there's lots of illustrators, lots of designers, lots of graphic people and filmmakers and all sorts in Hastings. And one guy I used to share a studio with is Scott Garrett. Can we go to the next PDF? And this is a photograph of Scott. So Scott is an amazing illustrator that you should look up, Scott Garrett. And he is a potter and a painter and a collage artist and an illustrator and all sorts. And he, in his studio, he was frustrated because he's doing a lot of kids' books and stuff, but he wanted to kind of push himself. So he had this idea called Wishlist, and Wishlist was a means to kind of just do loads of different characters for very little purpose other than just fulfilling your own kind of need to draw these little freaks. And the idea of Wishlist was that, essentially just saying, what does everybody wish for? What does everybody want? And each of those individuals has different needs and desires. Can we go through them? It might be easier if you do it, actually. So this is the sort of title, the hopes and wishes of a motley few. And I saw these, if we could just kind of scroll through them, and they're just really lovely little characters, gags, one-line gags, but they've got a little bit of depth to them. Some of them are quite poignant, some of them are daft, some of them reference other things, like he did a Schultz version. But it's just a way of generating hundreds and hundreds of characters without any kind of client remit. But it's not too big a project. Do you know what I mean? It's like, he could have done one picture and that would have been enough. But the fact that he's done about 500 of them is just great. And it just shows the legs that an idea can have if you just kind of give it time. So he was coming up with all these. I was seeing these kind of sat around doing nothing on his desk, and I was thinking, well, we could make a narrative out of this and do an animation. So there was a thing, I think it's still running, but the Random Acts was on Channel 4, and Random Acts was like a late night show which kind of gave voice to various things. There were like little short films about dance, there were live action films, there were animations. All of them had to be like 3 minutes, but they got screened basically, and it was kind of quite indulgent in the project. But we wrote a script. I basically took these characters, tried to combine them into some sort of narrative, and then did an animation. So, can you go to the next script, please? So this was an all Hastings production. The voices were largely, I've done a couple, but most of them were done by a guy called Steve First, who's a comedian. There's a character called Lenny Beige back in the day. But Steve First is from Hastings. I got him to do lots of the voices, the character voices. I animated it, designed it. So it's a real, you know, it was all made within a kind of 2-mile radius, 3-mile radius. But we made this, it got screened on Channel 4. And we got a little, you know, Scott, something that was a personal project that he just tapped away at, ended up being a 3-minute thing that got screened on Channel 4, which was great for all of us, really.
So if you could have any one thing, just the one wish fulfilled, anything at all, what would you choose? What would you wish for?
Opponents.
A good woman. Doesn't have to be a good woman. Doesn't have to be a woman.
Well, I guess just for a companion. Just happy to be with me for who I am and who doesn't want anything in return.
Instructions.
Well, I suppose some bones. Bones could be useful.
Detail.
Or gloves might do. Gloves or bones. To be more romantic. Human contact.
A TV makeover.
All cooking.
Carrots and then bed. Oh, is that 2? Can we have 2? No? Carrots in bed? Scissors.
A chemical pale.
More money.
Empathy.
Milk.
Stability.
Anonymity.
Dignity.
My childhood back.
I wish for your soul.
I wish I was real.
Time.
Yeah, so that's showing how an idea can kind of evolve. So the first few jobs that I showed you, which was kind of branding, there was a kind of a projection of an idea at the very beginning, where they had a remit of all the things that needs to be included. With this, the idea was kind of found, really. So he's got this, the principal idea, which is this kind of like singular, repetitive gang. But then the narrative that we kind of managed to kind of make in there was, is this word? Sorry, and it's something I prefer, where you kind of find the project, find the meaning, find the idea as you work, so you can kind of post-rationalise. So when we were getting the cards together to sort of storyboard this, the guy that sits with the squirrel was nothing to do with wish list. He was a separate drawing. But I kind of thought, in a way, it's quite nice to kind of bookend the project with him, because it gives a bit of a warmth. It means that the squirrel can interact with the dog, and the dog's talking about a squirrel, he's talking about wanting to have a friend and an acorn, and it's kind of like, it's combining, it's making a little universe really out of his characters. And that only came about as we were working on it, so we sort of found the idea rather than sort of thinking about it in the first place. That led to the next couple of quick times, please, where it got taken by KFC and turned into these little stings. If you could just play that.
What would you buy with £1.29?
A cape.
Those pigs. A haircut. Freedom! An app for my smartphone. Helium balloons. A mini fillet burger. I can't finish a whole one. Enjoy the KFC Streetwise menu with E4. The best combination since Saturday met Sunday.
So it's a weird thing because we didn't script this. Scott didn't script this, he just illustrated it. But they came to us and sort of said, we've had this idea and it's very like your project. And we thought, why don't we get these guys to do it? Which was essentially a way of saying, we're going to do this with or without you. Do you want in? And we did. But it's quite a good example of just something that's on somebody's desk, which is just a means to get rid of, wanting to draw these different characters. Something that was like a real personal, small project that then evolves. It evolved on his desk to have hundreds of characters. Then it turned into an animation that got screened and commissioned properly. That ended up being a commercial. So it's like it's quite a good idea, quite a good example of an idea that is a very personal little incidental thing that can turn into a bigger commercial concern and can actually pay for itself. It's kind of killed the project, like in terms of Scott, he doesn't do those anymore. But I think it probably saw the potential through to as good as it can get, really, so it's great. I also work a lot with Martin, as I say, so if we go to the next, and we've wanted to work together for a long time. Martin's a collage artist. Can we kind of zoom out? And we'd wanted to work together for ages, but then nothing really cropped up. And then he got approached to contribute to the Memorial Trust for the Holocaust survivors. And it's a kind of artistic response project where they allow you to have an interview, or I think it's all interviews anyway, but they basically, it's an artistic response to things that happened during the Holocaust. And it's like people like Stephen Fry, they were ceramic artists, all different people, all random things. And they approached Martin to do some collages about this young lady, Bettine LeBeau. She was Belgian and she was sent to a concentration camp as a kid. So we decided basically rather than him do images, it was a good opportunity. It was a tiny budget, I can't remember how much it was.
Nothing.
Nothing? Yeah. No, it's nothing. That's quite small. But it was an opportunity. I think I was quite dry at work, and it was an opportunity to kind of do a project together. So we went and interviewed Bettine. The worry with a project like this is obviously because it's the Holocaust, and the idea being that you're trying to remind everybody about the Holocaust, but everybody kind of knows about it, and it's an awful thing to say. It can get quite dark, quite repetitive, and quite heavy, and in a way it loses your ability to then connect with it because it's like over familiarity. What we found when we spoke to Bettine was that she totally confounded our expectations, and she was a really fizzy, lovely lady. She's in her 80s, she's passed away now, but she was in her 80s at the time. She was an artist, she did beautiful ceramics, she's a painter, she wrote, she was Benny Hill's Angel, she's in a Bond film, she's a real glamour puss. But when she recollected what happened about the Holocaust, she was talking only in terms of positive things, really. I mean, there were, as you'll see, I'll show you the animation, there were there are certain things that were obviously quite haunting to her. But at the end of the day, she was a kid going through this. And when you post-rationalise, when you're an adult and you look back at the Holocaust and you see how awful it is, that's one thing. When you're a kid in the middle of it, you're not really that privy to the bigger world politics, and you just look at the details. So the things that she was telling us about, the little incidents and scenarios, were all about like a farting dog. It was about a chicken that she was given by this farmer that she went to live with. It was about her brother being sent up to the hills to work as a shepherd. Now he went a bit nuts. And it was all like little incidental things that you kind of overlook, but there's a power to them because they're the things that are the memories that she took away. She actually counted herself to be a lucky girl, which is the phrase we used as the title. We'll play that movie, please. I might not play all of this because it's quite long, and I want to cover another couple of bits and bobs.
I am very positive attitude. Because I remember my mother said when I was little, you are a lucky child. You came in this world when things were already better. And I was with my mom, I'm a lucky child. So when they were crying, I never see my parents again. I said, I will. Yeah? And when they were crying that they're hungry, well, my mother wasn't that cold, so I can't remember the wonderful thing she did. We were separated during the war, my parents, for 5 years. My story is, I come from Belgium. So therefore my war starts in 1940. When I was in the concentration camp, I was 8 years old. 8 years old children, they left for the gas chamber. There's no such a thing as them, right? So this OSC, Œuvre au Secours des Enfants, she came in the concentration camp and she says, I can save 10 children tonight. So nearly all the mothers says, no, where I go, my children go. Now my mother was different. My mother says, yes, take them first, because I had a brother boy. But I want to be sure that if I ever get out of this hellhole here, I should know how to get in touch with my kids. So they said, yes, it will be all organized. So my mother says, take them first. Now they smuggled me out from the camp, middle of the night. In the concentration camp, you slept in paillasse, is like a sack with straw in it. So here I am, in this fresh, crispy white shirt. And what did I do? I weaved in that thing. I was so ashamed. The next day, she takes the children to Majelier, which they made it into a children's home. And I arrived there, and I got these lice. Nobody wants to sit next to me. I'm trying to get out of bed so they should see I'm weaving. And now it's breakfast. They pass you a big plate with lovely bread. So I start looking for a bigger piece. So they was disgusting. And she, instead of being nice to me, she said, here, you don't touch the bread, you take the butter. Now they ask me if I can read and write and all this, but I'm not listening. And he hits me on the head. So I wanted to go back to the concentration camp. Then they decided they're going to send all the children to Switzerland. There were 2 young men making false carte d'identité. And he said, from now on, your second name is not Falek, it's Frétier, French name, right? Your father is a prisoner of war, and your mother is dead. And never, even if people are very nice to you, you don't say you're Jewish. So that's why now, I tell all my friends, don't tell me any secrets. I don't want to have that feeling I'm not going to do that. The farmers who looked after Tati and Toto, they were really lovely, lovely people. But when I came to them, I had to change my personality. Because I shout a lot and we had dirty jokes, but they were so polite and they spoke softly. And when she made the food, you know, and they were sitting around and saying, oh, what flavor did you put in there? It's delicious. But all the farmers had dogs. So he had the dog and his feet. Unfortunately, he had wind. And every time the dog passed the wind, he said, none of that. So I kept dying to say, if you don't move the ship on you. But I didn't. They grabbed my style. Yeah, my brother was all by himself because they set him up to
There's
be
more,
a
there's more.
shepherd.
And it goes on about a chicken and it's very sweet. But what that was just, there's very little animation in it. It's a lot of panning across Martin's work, and it was finding kind of ways to give it a bit of life because there wasn't any budget, because there was very little time. There was kind of a minimal aesthetic to the animation. But we did that back maybe 6 years ago. And again, you know, like the whole sort of speculate to accumulate thing that happened with Scott, where we drew pictures that ended up as a commercial. This we did, and then we didn't really think that much of it. It didn't really lead to anything. But then a couple of years later, maybe about sort of just 3 years ago, we got approached to work on documentary. It was called Love Fraud, and they approached to sort of say, has Martin's work been animated before? And we had this project as a kind of showpiece. So we showed them, and we got a great job. And the camera was going to pan back, come through a window, go through a garden, go through a fantasy universe, and then end up back with her in the bedroom. This is an example of where you kind of pitch that idea to the client prior to thinking about whether you can do it, and they love it, and then you can't see it through. So I tried to animate it, and I couldn't do it. There was something about the speed and the tempo with which it would have to drag back. It was going to be really quick, too quick to fit with the tone of the piece. So it's a really bad idea sometimes to kind of limit yourself, to restrict yourself by proffering up an idea before you've actually thought it through. Also, there's a section in this where there's a bee, and I couldn't animate the bee. So I was trying to animate, for some reason, I was trying to animate the bee's wings, and it didn't work. I do it like again, it's animated on 2, so it's every 2 frames rather than 1, so it's kind of a little bit more jerky and a bit more tactile and handmade. And the problem with that was when the bee's wings were moving really quickly, you couldn't register that. It didn't work, it just looked like they were jerking around, so I had to put them into slow motion. And then that dictated the tone of the whole piece. And then I thought, well, the camera can be in slow motion. And then, because it's in slow motion, it can't move very far, you have these slow fades between the different sections. So this is a case of something where a failure within the scene, my inability to actually animate that camera move, my inability to animate the bee, actually made for a good thing, because it then dictated the way that I put it together. So if you just play that.
Are you there, God? It's me, Margaret. I've been looking for you, God. I looked in temple, I looked in church, and today I looked for you when I wanted to confess. But you weren't there. I didn't feel you at all, not the way I do when I talk to you at night. Why, God? Why do I only feel you when I'm alone? It's a key.
But the slow fades give a longer idea of time. Like if you do that in a film, if you slow fade between scenes, it generally, in the language of film, it means that this is a long time later. So it gives a longer, bigger, sort of dreamlike effect to the whole sequence. But like I say, it was made out of mistakes. So that's quite good. There's another bit next as well. I'll be wrapping up in a sec. Some of them are quite. You what?
Get the crook out.
It's gone out. Hang on a sec. Sorry, but this is so yeah, that previous one. This is just an example as well of like, as soon as we'd established this way of animating. Within Love Fraud, that first project, they needed a secondary style, which would, the first style, the stuff I've shown you so far, was from the perspective of the women talking about him. They're positive, they were bright, there was a clarity to the images, they were really vivid and bold and happy. There was lots of use of flowers, big colour palettes. because they were misguided women who had this kind of dream of who this guy was, they were completely lied to. He, on the other hand, was this dark, self-serving twat who we represented with a different aesthetic, and this was far more like kind of a film noir, kind of creepy, because it was dirty palette, it was kind of dark. This is supposed to be his internal kind of mind mechanism, so play this, please. There's not many documentaries that will give you the scope to kind of do something as long and boring as this and get away with it, but, you know.
I've never told anybody this before. But I came from a broken family. My dad had a huge alcohol problem. He divorced my mom. And he remarried several times. He kept having more kids. And it was like he forgot I existed. One of his wives, she was giving pretty much in a bowl and walking through my bedroom TV. And then she would beat the shit out of me with a belt. That went marked. And my dad did nothing to help me. Nothing. Sorry, here's what I was talking about. Something was fun. I desperately want to be part of a real family.
So, it just, like, if you did a piece of animation like that, there's no way that you would be commissioned by Amazon or HBO or Netflix or anything to do anything. If you did that yourself and just put it on a show reel, nobody would commission you. The fact is that sometimes things that are put out in the realm of publishing or broadcast suddenly carry a clout and people think, well, that's a proper thing now. The fact that we kind of eked into it really by doing a self-made documentary that was about a really dark subject matter and managed to leaven it, make it a little bit more charming. The fact that we could then eke into sort of documentaries and make things that were pretty literal to start with and then start pushing the abstract and then get to this sort of weird expressionism, you know, with a kid that's in a room full of growing mushrooms and things. It's pretty, you know, now and again we have to kind of pinch ourselves that that people are commissioning this stuff, but it's because it gets screened, and it did well. It kind of screened at Sundance and stuff like that. And sometimes I had an illustrator friend at college, Neil Layton, who was amazing, but and still is obviously, but he draws like a child, and it's really naive and a little bit kind of like random. And I was saying to Andy last night, he came to a publisher's that I used to work at, Osborne, and I was trying to get him illustration work straight out of college. And he came and he had this folio that he'd made himself out of corrugated plastic with parcel tape around it, and he had pubic hairs and all sorts of things in his folio. It was horrendous. It was really badly put together and really bad. It's all his artwork, which is beautiful, but it was presented in a way that had masking tape and it was really dodgy, and they basically said, there's no way we're going to go near this guy. Subsequently, he worked with like Michael Rosen, he got published, and then on the back of that, I think he won some book awards, and he's now probably in the top 5 kids' book illustrators because it was kind of sanctioned by being published. And some of these things, you know, ideas that you might think are unusable, you can kind of eke them in incrementally over time. And they kind of gain validity by being screened, by being published eventually, and then you end up at this point. I'm going to stop now because I feel like I'm just waffling. yeah. But there's loads. I've got like this. I'll get Andy to kind of put links to kind of show reels and whatnot, because it's worth watching some of the stuff that we did for Love Lord, which sounds self-serving, but it's mainly Martin's work, as you can see in a minute. But it's worth watching. I'll send links now. And the Marks and Spencer's thing, which I didn't bring, is in Marks and Spencer's. Thank you very much. All right.